After 4 days, a dead man returns to life. A biblical miracle or a medical anomaly? The story of Lazarus challenges our understanding. Could Lazarus Syndrome, a rare cardiac phenomenon, be the key to unraveling this ancient mystery with the light of modern science? Prepare to question what you know about life, death, and the inexplicable. The biblical narrative of Lazarus of Bethany is, without a doubt, one of the most fascinating and debated events in the New Testament. It describes a scenario where, after 4 days of his death and already buried, Jesus calls him back to life from his tomb. For Christian faith, this is a fundamental miracle, unquestionable proof of divine power over death and the anticipation of the final resurrection. However, for the scientific mind, this story presents a puzzle that defies all known biological and physical laws. Our central theme, Lazarus, can science explain the resurrection? Begins to unfold precisely here, at the heart of this ancient question. What exactly does it mean to be dead? In antiquity, the definition of death was fundamentally based on external and quite rudimentary observations. There was no complex medical equipment. The cessation of visible breathing, the stopping of perceptible heartbeats to the touch, and the lack of response to painful stimuli were the decisive criteria. There was, obviously, no modern technology to measure brain activity via electroencephalograms, the presence of subtle electrical impulses in muscles, or the complex cascade of cellular events that occur after the cessation of vital functions. The threshold of death was a fine line, often interpreted simply and, at times, mistakenly. Cases of catalepsy, deep comas, or even prolonged fainting could easily be mistaken for death, leading to premature burials, a very real fear at the time. The biblical account of Lazarus in John 11:39 makes the mystery even deeper by mentioning Martha's warning to Jesus. "Lord, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been dead 4 days." This phrase is not a mere narrative detail. It is a crucial indication that the process of decomposition had already begun and was advanced. Putrefaction, which causes the foul and characteristic odor of a decomposing body, results from the massive proliferation of anaerobic bacteria that naturally live in the gastrointestinal tract and, after death, migrate to other body tissues. They break down the body's proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, releasing gases that cause bloating and the characteristic putrid smell. This suggests that Lazarus was, in fact, clinically dead long enough for irreversible biological processes to begin, far beyond a simple faint, deep coma, or catalepsy. The Bible does not describe an inert body, but a body already in the process of biological disintegration. The essence of our central theme lies precisely in this colossal gap between what faith asserts a supernatural resurrection, a direct challenge to the laws of nature, and what science can conceive and explain within its paradigms. The foundation of this ancient story not only forces us to confront the definitions of life and death that humanity has maintained throughout history, even before the advent of modern medicine and its complex diagnostic tools, but also pushes us to question the limits of our own understanding. Lazarus, in this sense, transcends being merely a biblical character. He becomes a catalyst for humanity's eternal quest for answers about existence, finitude, the definition of life, and the possibility of something beyond biological death. It is from this initial question mark, this confrontation between the natural and the supernatural, that we will explore the scientific and theological complexities surrounding this enigma. The story of Lazarus challenges us to look at death not just as an end, but as a starting point for profound questions about our own reality. Modern medicine, with all its technology and diagnostic advancements, continues to encounter phenomena that, although rare, challenge common understanding and remind us of the complexity of the human body. One such phenomenon, particularly intriguing and highly relevant to our central theme, is known as Lazarus Syndrome. This medical term, named in clear allusion to the biblical character who returned from death, describes the spontaneous return of circulation in patients after prolonged and ultimately unsuccessful cardiopulmonary resuscitation attempts have been declared futile and consequently terminated. In simpler terms, it's when an individual who has been declared clinically dead and whose resuscitation efforts have ceased comes back to life on their own, without any further medical intervention. Although documented in various medical publications and case reports, Lazarus syndrome events are extremely rare. They are estimated to occur in less than 1% of resuscitation attempts, making them a true statistical anomaly. Crucially, and this is a vital distinction for our study, these events usually manifest within a few minutes after CPR cessation, and never days, as in the biblical account of Lazarus. This temporal distinction is the fundamental pillar for understanding the vast difference between the medical phenomenon and the miraculous account. The proposed causes for Lazarus syndrome are still subject to study and debate within the medical community, but several physiological hypotheses have been put forward to try and explain these surprising returns. Delayed action of medications. During prolonged CPR, various drugs are administered, such as adrenaline and other vasopressors. It can take some time for these medications to be absorbed, metabolized, and reach their effective concentration in the body. Thus, their effects may manifest belatedly, triggering the resumption of heartbeats after CPR has been stopped and the team has already given up. Relief of pulmonary hyperinflation. During CPR, especially with vigorous and rapid manual ventilation, excessive air can accumulate in the lungs. This drastically increases intrathoracic pressure, which can compress the heart and large blood vessels, impeding venous return to the heart and, consequently, effective cardiac pumping. When CPR and ventilation are stopped, this intrathoracic pressure decreases, allowing the heart to decompress and, if there is still some myocardial viability, spontaneously resume circulation. Delayed release of catecholamines. The extreme stress of cardiac arrest and CPR itself can lead to the release of a flood of endogenous hormones, such as adrenaline and noradrenaline, by the adrenal glands. These hormones can belatedly stimulate the cardiovascular system and trigger the recovery of heartbeats. Cardiac decompression. In some cases, the cessation of manual, intermittent chest compressions may allow the heart, which was under mechanical stress and compressed, to regain its contractile capacity and rhythm. These cases of Lazarus syndrome, while surprising and often shocking to medical teams and families, are acute and, crucially, reversible events that fit within a physiological understanding, albeit rare and not fully elucidated. They represent an extreme manifestation of the complexity and, at times, unpredictable resilience of the human body in critical situations. However, it is essential to reiterate that Lazarus syndrome occurs in the context of recent clinical death, where cellular and organ damage is not yet irreversible, and the body still has an intrinsic potential to recover homeostasis. It is a spontaneous reanimation of a patient who is in a transient cardiorespiratory arrest, not the reversal of a biological decomposition process that lasts for days. Lazarus syndrome, therefore, illustrates the limits of defining and diagnosing death in medicine, but also establishes a clear boundary for what science can realistically explain in terms of returning from the dead in a long-term scenario of physical deterioration. It reminds us of the fine line between life and death, but also the insurmountable frontier of decomposition. To truly grasp the magnitude of the distance separating Lazarus syndrome from the biblical case, and to understand why science cannot explain Lazarus' return, we need to delve into the intricate underlying mechanisms of biological death and comprehend what prevents it from being easily reversed, especially after a prolonged period like 4 days. Death is not an instantaneous event. It is a cascade of cellular and organic processes that inevitably begin the moment vital functions cease. The starting point of biological death is circulatory and respiratory arrest. When the heart stops pumping blood and the lungs cease to provide oxygen, blood flow stops. Without this vital flow, oxygen and essential nutrients do not reach the body's tissues. The organs most sensitive to oxygen deprivation are the brain and the heart itself. Irreversible brain damage. In a matter of just 4 to 6 minutes without oxygen, brain cells begin to suffer irreversible damage. The absence of ATP leads to the failure of ion pumps, the accumulation of intracellular calcium, the release of toxic neurotransmitters, and subsequent programmed and non-programmed neuronal death. After about 10 to 15 minutes of complete cerebral ischemia, brain damage is generally considered so extensive that the recovery of significant cognitive functions is improbable, even with the restoration of circulation. Lazarus, after 4 days, would have had his brain completely destroyed at a cellular level. Generalized cell death. Subsequently, other organs and tissues begin to deteriorate. Prolonged oxygen deprivation leads to necrosis and autolysis, the self-digestion of cells by their own lysosomal enzymes, which are released when cell membranes rupture. Cellular structures disintegrate, and the integrity of tissues is severely compromised. Classic postmortem signs. A few hours after death, classic cadaveric signs appear, which forensic experts use to estimate the time of death. Rigor mortis, the stiffening of muscles due to the exhaustion of ATP, which prevents muscle fiber relaxation after contraction. It begins around 2 to 4 hours after death and peaks at 12 to 24 hours, lasting up to 36 to 48 hours. After 4 days, rigor mortis would have resolved, and the body would be flaccid again, but now due to decomposition. Livor mortis, the reddish-purple discoloration of the skin in the dependent parts of the body, resulting from the accumulation of blood in blood vessels due to gravity without circulation. It becomes fixed in about 8 to 12 hours, meaning that if the body is moved, the discoloration no longer changes. After 4 days, it would be prominent and permanent. Putrefaction and advanced decomposition. Crucially, after about 24 to 48 hours, the process of putrefaction begins on a massive scale. This is the active stage of decomposition, caused by the uncontrolled proliferation of bacteria and other microorganisms that colonize the body. They break down the proteins, fats, and carbohydrates of the tissues, releasing a variety of gases that cause the body to bloat, the skin to discolor, and, distinctively, the foul odor mentioned by Martha. At this stage, the internal organs would be considerably damaged, disorganized, and in the process of liquefaction, and the cellular structure compromised to a point where spontaneous restoration, or even with any currently conceivable medical intervention, would be biologically impossible. A decomposing body cannot simply turn back on. Lazarus Syndrome, in contrast, occurs in a scenario of recent clinical death, where brain and organ damage is not yet irreversible, and the body still has the potential to recover homeostasis if circulation is restored quickly. Understanding these detailed mechanisms of death helps us contextualize the story of Lazarus not as a purely medical event, but as something that fundamentally transcends the biological laws we know. The implicit and inexorable rules of biology indicate that once the cascade of cellular and tissue deterioration reaches a certain point, the path is unidirectional. The reversal of putrefaction and the restoration of organic tissues in a body already in decomposition, without any external intervention, are, by definition, beyond the frontiers of science and what we consider physically possible. A specific and undeniably crucial aspect of the Lazarus narrative, which fundamentally differentiates it from any known medical phenomenon, is the explicit mention that he had been dead for 4 days. This temporality is not a mere narrative detail. It is, in fact, the insurmountable watershed between what science can explain and what, for many, remains firmly within the realm of the supernatural miracle. The length of time Lazarus remained in a state of death is the factor that eliminates any possibility of a purely biological explanation. In the context of modern medicine and biology, the definition of death is much more precise than in antiquity, evolving beyond the simple absence of pulse and breathing. Brain death, the irreversible cessation of all brainstem and cortical functions, is the definitive criterion for legal and biological death in most countries. This diagnosis is typically made within a few hours after a catastrophic event, such as a massive stroke or severe traumatic brain injury that deprives the brain of oxygen and nutrients. Once established, brain death is considered irreversible, and the body, even if artificially maintained by life support machines, is legally dead. Even in extreme and rare situations of profound hypothermia, where the body's metabolism is drastically reduced, the window of viability for cerebral and organ recovery is strictly limited. Although there are reports of people who have survived prolonged cardiac arrests in conditions of severe cold, cerebral survival with preserved cognitive functions beyond 24 to 48 hours, without any life support and under normal room temperature conditions, is virtually impossible. These are cases of apparent death due to hypothermia, not complete biological death. After 4 days without vital functions in a Mediterranean climate, the human body would not only be dead, in the clinical sense, but would be in an advanced and irreversible stage of postmortem decomposition. The observable and biologically expected characteristics would be resolution of rigor mortis. Cadaveric stiffening would have already subsided, and the body would be flaccid again, but due to muscle disintegration, not relaxation. Fixed and advanced livor mortis. The purple discoloration from blood pooling would be prominent and would not change position if the body were moved, indicating that the blood has already settled in the vessels. Visible and olfactory putrefaction. As the Bible recounts, the foul odor would be intense. The body would be visibly bloated due to the accumulation of gases produced by bacteria. The skin would show greenish or purplish discoloration, with superficial veins visible. Gas bubbles filled with foul liquid could be present on the skin. Massive organ damage. Internally, organs would be in the process of liquefaction, their cellular structures ruptured, and the integrity of vital tissues like the brain would be completely compromised, converting into a mass without structure or function. The idea that a body at this advanced stage of decomposition could spontaneously reverse all these processes, decomposition, bloating, discoloration, massive cellular damage, and return to life, with all its functions restored, is completely outside the scope of physiology, pathology, and any biomedical knowledge we possess. Lazarus Syndrome, on the other hand, involves a return of circulation within minutes after cardiac arrest, before irreversible cellular damage and decomposition set in extensively. The difference in time, from minutes to 4 days, is the insurmountable difference between a very rare medical anomaly yet explainable within biology, and an event that, in light of science, transcends biological and physical laws. This unique facet of the central theme forces us to recognize the clear limits of scientific explanation and to confront the possibility that some events simply do not fit into our current models of reality, demanding a different perspective for their understanding. The idea of returning from the dead, or some form of life after death, is not exclusive to the narrative of Lazarus or Christianity. It echoes in various cultures, mythologies, and religions throughout human history. From the Egyptian stories of Osiris, who was dismembered and resurrected by Isis, to the Greek myths of heroes who visit the underworld and return, like Orpheus, who tries to rescue Eurydice, or Persephone, who spends part of the year in the realm of the dead and returns to the surface, to Buddhist and Hindu beliefs in reincarnation and cycles of rebirth, humanity has always been fascinated by the overcoming of death, the central theme of Lazarus. Therefore, not only connects to a specific event in Christian faith, but to a universal and profound yearning for the continuity of life, for overcoming finitude, and for the possibility of something beyond what the eyes can see. This quest for transcendence is an intrinsic characteristic of the human condition. In the contemporary context, science, while not seeking to resurrect in the biblical and miraculous sense, is advancing in areas that, in a way, aim to challenge the limits of death or extend life in ways previously unimaginable. These areas represent humanity's attempt to delay the inevitable or to reverse extensive damage to the body. Prolonged resuscitation and advanced life support, improved cardiopulmonary resuscitation techniques, new vasoactive drugs, and sophisticated life support equipment, such as extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, have made it possible to save people who previously would have been considered beyond hope, especially in cases of prolonged cardiac arrest or severe hypothermia, where metabolism is drastically reduced. Cryopreservation, the idea of freezing entire bodies or organs in the hope of reanimating them in the future, although still highly speculative and without proven success in humans, reflects the desire to pause the death process and, one day, reverse it with future technologies. It is a concept that plays with the possibility of suspending biological degradation. Bioengineering and regenerative medicine, the ability to grow organs in the lab from stem cells, research into gene therapies to correct genetic defects, and the development of biomaterials to repair damaged tissues open doors for repairing massive tissue damage and curing degenerative diseases, aiming to prolong healthy life and restore lost functions. Research on consciousness and near-death experiences, although controversial and difficult to study scientifically, investigations into what happens to consciousness during cardiac arrest and reports of NDEs seek to understand the mind and perception at moments close to death. These studies raise profound questions about the nature of consciousness and its relationship with the physical body, and whether the mind can exist independently of brain activity. These scientific advancements, while remarkable and promising in their ability to prolong life and repair damage, still operate strictly within the limits of known biology and physiology. They seek to extend life, heal, repair, and, in rare cases, reverse recent clinical death processes before irreversible damage and decomposition occur. But they never achieve the ability to reverse massive tissue decomposition or prolonged brain death, as in the case of Lazarus. The connection to future contexts lies in humanity's continuous and tireless quest for greater longevity and the overcoming of diseases, but always within a scientific paradigm that demands evidence, replicability, and explanation based on natural laws. The story of Lazarus, in turn, offers a stark contrast. It invites us to ponder whether there are phenomena that transcend the material and biological dimension that science is capable of investigating with its current methods. While science delves into the how biological processes work and how we can manipulate them to prolong life, faith and the story of Lazarus often turn to the why of life and death, and the possibility of an intervention or reality that escapes measuring instruments. At this crossroads, the paths of science and faith diverge in their explanatory capacity, leaving us with the question of where the true power of explanation lies for such extraordinary events and whether reality is vaster than our current instruments can capture. We have arrived at the pinnacle of our exploration, at the point where science, however robust, advanced, and tireless it may be in its quest to unravel the mysteries of the universe, encounters its insurmountable limits. The story of Lazarus, with its description of 4 days of death, showing clear signs of decomposition, and the subsequent reanimation to a state of full conscious life, remains an unfathomable enigma for modern biology, forensic pathology, and medicine. No current scientific explanation, including the rare and fascinating Lazarus Syndrome, which operates in a completely different time window and under distinct physiological conditions, can remotely explain the complete and spontaneous restoration of a body in an advanced state of decomposition, with the reversal of massive cellular damage, tissue putrefaction, and the reactivation of a brain that would be irreversibly destroyed at a cellular level. This is the core of what the central theme reveals about our perception of reality and about what may yet transcend our current understanding. Science operates under rigorous principles of rationality, empiricism, and verifiability. It seeks the measurable, the replicable, the observable, and the predictable, building explanatory models based on concrete evidence and experimentation. The story of Lazarus, in this sense, directly challenges these fundamental pillars of scientific methodology. It firmly places itself in the realm of the extraordinary, of the miracle for millions of believers worldwide, or a powerful allegory about life, death, and hope for others. Regardless of the interpretation, it does not fit into the categories of natural events explainable by science. What this dichotomy teaches us is, above all, the humility of our knowledge. Science's inability to explain such a singular event does not automatically nullify the validity of the narrative for those who accept it by faith. On the contrary, it forces us to confront the idea that there may be mysteries that, by their very nature, are beyond the capacity of empirical investigation and the tools that science currently possesses. Recognizing this limit is not a defeat for reason, but rather an expansion of our understanding of the complexity of existence and of the different domains of human knowledge. Science explains how things work in the material universe, but perhaps it cannot explain the why or the origin of all phenomena, especially those that transcend the natural laws we observe. The narrative of Lazarus, therefore, is not merely an ancient tale about overcoming death recorded in a religious text. It is a timeless and profound invitation to reflect on existential questions that challenge the very essence of human being. The limits of human understanding. What do we truly know about life, death, consciousness, and what might exist beyond our immediate perception? How vast is the universe of phenomena, and how limited is our current arsenal for understanding them? The relationship between faith and reason. Are they necessarily opposed like oil and water, or can they coexist? Addressing different aspects of reality and offering distinct lenses through which to interpret the world. Can faith provide answers for what reason cannot reach? And can reason strengthen or challenge faith? The possibility of the inexplicable. Are there phenomena that simply do not fit into our current scientific models and that challenge us to consider other dimensions of reality, perhaps not measurable by our scientific methods? Lazarus questions us whether reality is solely material or if there is a metaphysical plane that interacts with the physical. As we close this cycle of analysis, the story of Lazarus remains a vivid and persistent reminder that, although science continues to unravel the universe's secrets at a dizzying pace, bringing us unimaginable advancements, there are domains that seem to resist any purely material explanation. It urges us to keep an open mind, to constantly question, and to cultivate a sense of wonder for what, for now, still transcends our capacity for full comprehension and manifests as the inexplicable. The story of Lazarus continues to echo, centuries later, challenging logic and science with its depth and mystery. Lazarus Syndrome shows us the extraordinary resilience of the human body and the limits of clinical death. But the account of a man decomposing and returning to life after 4 days reminds us of the unexplored vastness of the unknown. Will science one day have all the answers to such extraordinary phenomena? Or will the story of Lazarus always remind us that there are mysteries that, by their very nature, transcend our current understanding, inviting us to look beyond what we can see and measure?